Good evening, Baiba.
Good morning, Christopher.
This is our second episode in this new project journey that we're on together that we're lovingly calling brandLingual, how we are talking very openly about what it is like in that messy middle between two seemingly opposing dialects in the marketing world, whether that be how you might describe it, sort of Kotler's segment target positioning theory and more evidence-based thinking, innovated and popularized by the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, also sometimes referred to as MBA, or market-based asset theory. That's one place to get stuck in the middle. Another place to get stuck in the middle is like when you're an agency practitioner, stuck between maybe an agency team that isn't fully fluent in all these things and a client team that isn't fully fluent in all these things. Anyway, there's a lot of mess in the middle to talk about. And so in the coming podcast episodes, infinitely into the future, we have a ton of content to discuss. But maybe one of the things that we talk about today is maybe some of our own unlearning journeys. I think one of the things that can be most confronting when one starts to understand that there is such a thing as marketing science or evidence-based marketing, a wonderful term coined by Byron Sharp that really sets up a really interesting proxy between evidence-based medicine, which was the known term and had never been applied to marketing. But just hearing that term and starting to ask the question, well, what does that even mean? And how is it different than data-driven? Boy, does it set up a whole bunch of different mental mousetraps that you can get stuck in and can be very challenged by. So this is a topic that we would love to discuss with you, our watchers and our listeners and potential cohort learners and co-learners along with us, that we in the future hopefully will actually bring on some other guests and some other thought leaders to have them share their own unlearning and learning journeys and the things that they might have a hard time giving up or the things that were easy to give up, and then what new knowledge filled those gaps in between. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today, and hopefully you might even hear and sense and see yourselves in these conversations. And if so, we would always love for you to tell us in the comments, whether it's in the LinkedIn post that will be featuring this or on the many different platforms in which we'll be hosting this, to go ahead and drop into the comments your own unlearning journey and the things that you have a hard time giving up on. And maybe we might even invite you onto a future episode to talk about some of those things. You know who you are. Some of you I already have in mind. So Bobby, you want to start with something that you've felt has been more, I don't know, particularly confronting or more prickly to have to deal with in your own mind or with your own students or own clients?
I was thinking about this topic a lot lately, and I think these conversations also by reflecting on how I have went this path, or what is my journey, how did I get here, especially in the last episode. It makes me kind of reflect a lot. And I think that also for this kind of like a big topic, like what have you unlearned, I think it's very important to start from how did you learn the stuff like at the very beginning. And my journey has been very bumpy because first I took some course program in my home country, and it was very kind of weird and artificial to learn about creative strategy if you haven't kind of been in the shoes of creative strategists. And I was very kind of dedicated to understand this topic, so I made a lot of notes. Basically, I felt like I am almost like AI transcriber in today's context, that I basically almost wrote down every word that the lecturer or trainer was basically saying and also showing in the slides. And somehow I convinced my boss in Fallon that he needs to kind of pick me as a junior strategist during the time to start to be a strategist, that I have already done a course and I have done this and that. And when I got in a position, there was, of course, the situation was completely different. Nothing from those sessions or from that course really reflected the reality. I was like, I have a lot of notes, but those notes doesn't work in reality. And of course, like, what do you do if you're a junior strategist? And I was in a team only with my direct director, who was at the time head of the strategy or head of the planning, and I was a junior. So I went to my boss. And he was like, I don't have a time to train you. I don't have a time to kind of, share these things with you. This is something that you need to kind of, figure out by yourself. And that was the time before there was LinkedIn, and there were a lot of these nice bubbles where people are sharing a lot of tools and tricks and some sort of tips, like how to do things. Or there were some mentors who were offering their time in video calls. Nothing like that was during the time. And I was completely kind of cornered in a corner that you need to come up with something. There's a task, but you don't know how to do it. And you are completely, I don't want to use strong words, but you are somewhere in those strong words, like in the situation where you could use a lot of strong words. So yeah, and I also asked to my boss, who was my first kind of like a strategy boss. And I asked him, like, is there some sort of methodology? Is there some sort of like a way how to do it? And he was like, strategy can go back and forth, and that's it. There's no methodology how to properly do it. I was like, that doesn't kind of help me at all. Like, I'm more deeper into the kind of like a woods and kind of lost. So my success story was that there was a pitch, and there was a very senior freelance strategy director who came to Prague from Berlin, where I am located now. So maybe that's why I came back to Berlin. I don't know. My unconsciousness maybe works in these weird ways. But this guy, he was very senior, he was very experienced, and kind of very well known and very respected in the industry. And I was a junior who was just basically put in team with him now to work on a pitch. So what I did, I asked him like, hey, can you give me some time, like, I don't know, hour or half hour to kind of share like how to think about these things, how to even work around these things, because I can do the tasks that you are like, giving me, but I need to also understand this broader, like bigger picture, like what are we actually trying to achieve? Oh God, we had an open office and he was yelling at me. He was like, I'm not here hired to train some junior strategists. Everybody was looking at me.
Wow.
And I was like, whoops, what can I do? And I think I was so stubborn and also desperate that at the end of the pitch, like when the pitch ended, he was like, okay, come here, sit down. And then he spent some time with me and he explained things to me. And he was actually very surprised also with my work for the pitch, that I really helped him to understand the cultural nuances in a particular region. And the agency won the pitch, so everybody was happy and I got my time to learn the strategy. And I think this is the worst experience at some point, how to even, tell the story to any young talent, like this could be maybe your path if you are starting to work in agency. I think nowadays you can't be even in this situation or in this position, but I do believe a lot of more senior strategists who are listening to this episode, they can relate a lot with my story. And I think from there came this my inner need to do a lot of research, to kind of talk with strategists and kind of really interview them and understand like, hey, how do you do your strategy? Is there a difference between different regions? Is there a difference? How do you do the strategy as when you do a creative strategy, when you do brand strategy, when you do, I don't know, media strategy? What are all these nuances and differences and stuff like that? And that was basically my big research that I did during the COVID time by myself, when I interviewed more than, I don't know, 50 strategies across the globe, just to understand like how they do their things. And I learned a lot. And I also did a very immersive survey. I collected more than 300 responses because that was a COVID time and everybody wanted to share their good energy to others in these dark times. And I found my success moment by doing that immersive research, because at the moment, if I would try to do some sort of similar project on my own, I would probably be stuck in some sort of like situation where people just don't have time, or they are not interested to donate their time, because we are not in that specific circumstances. We are not in COVID time. So yeah, I think this is my journey. I will give a floor to Christopher to kind of share his story, but my story is kind of like, I think, a very typical one, but on the other hand, a very kind of like a challenging one.
It is. It's probably a very typical one within certainly in the advertising, world as an agency practitioner. I mean, I'd like to think, although I could be proven wrong, and in fact, if someone has some counterfactual evidence, please let me know. But like, if you are a young architect or a young tax accountant or a young attorney or a young doctor or tattoo artist or physician, or I could probably go, engineer, certainly a long list of professions. If earlier in your career, had you walked into a new workplace and said, so what should I be doing? No one around you probably would have said, well, just do whatever you want. Just make it up. There are no patterns for this. There are no rudiments, no fundamentals that you need to know. Just wing it. It's fun. Right? Like that just doesn't happen in a lot of other industries. And yet I continue to see and feel that gravitational pull of wanting to push back into we're just making all of this up. And somehow that's more freeing and more liberating to not to know that there is fundamental law-like patterns or certain right ways, to do things versus wrong ways to do things, and then that wonderful gray area in between, which we should all still sort of, play in. But yeah, a lot of us coming up in our careers, just to kind of pick up in probably a similar time period to what you narrated in my own life. I remember sitting in a room, and the question kept coming up about, so how is this actually going to work? And I heard several different times over the early part of my career, someone saying, well, if I knew that, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd have millions of dollars. And, to be raised in that atmosphere where it's just okay, just not to really know or even like care, and to have it sort of comedically be a part of like the shared reality, it was a strange way to kind of come into the industry. But the most insidious part of it is it actually starts to desensitize you to feeling like that's still okay. And to be rolling into meetings with recommendations and insights and ideas and frameworks and recommendations that have perhaps not a great hold on reality and how markets really buy, and yet millions of dollars is being spent, on these various efforts. And sometimes you accidentally get it right, and sometimes you inevitably, get it wrong, because you're romantically attracted to this accidentalism as the means for where creativity really lives. And there is still a lot of quote unquote romantic magic around creativity, and very much should be. But the parts of the process that often we're talking about as strategists, particularly when we're collaborating with our media colleagues, these are parts of the puzzle that, in fact, if they're not right, I don't care how creative anything else is, it doesn't have a chance to be noticed, out in the world. Just like that really beautiful rendering of a building doesn't have a chance to stand up in one earthquake or one rainstorm or whatever if the fundamentals and the foundations are not strong. And so those rudiments, those were things that were never taught to me, were never exposed to me. It had to be, I think it was 2017 that I ever found out about the NBD-Dirichlet distribution. I owe that to a post from Tom Roach on BVH Labs, which you can still find, and it's actually a part of his own blog where he talks about if you're not starting with zero, you're starting wrong, because most buyers aren't buying, and it's always about going from 0 to 1, which I always like to refer to as none to one because it rhymes. But yeah, it was, I mean, at that point, I was already 20 years into my career, and no one had ever talked to me about that. I'd never seen that ever. It took almost 20, think about all the people who come into the ad industry and are gone within 3 to 5 years and go off to do something else, and never heard about it, much less myself, who hung in it for 20 years and still in it, to be very honest, to this day. And yeah, it is so dramatically impacted the way I think about how buyers buy and how markets move and what's necessary to actually accomplish any kind of meaningful growth, that, yeah, I'm just struck with today, like how I didn't know that in the past. And now it makes so much sense. All of the things that didn't work, all the campaigns and meetings and time, and this is time I won't get back in my life. Money will come and go, but time, once you spend it, you don't get it back. So that reflection to me is just similar in the sense that, we both, like perhaps many people watching or listening to this, you come into the career just like interested in something about it that drew you in. And it probably had little to do with the fundamentals. And then as soon as you got in, there was no one to really show you the fundamental ropes or take you through the rudiments. I mean, one of my hobbies is a drummer most of my life. That's my parallel life. I wanted to be a jazz studies major at UNT up in Denton, and I've loved music. Music's a big part of my entire life. And as soon as I had told someone that I wanted to play the drums, there was a very strict regimen that you could kind of step into. It's like you start first with 2 sticks and a pad, learn the rudiments, right? Paradiddles, flams, single stroke rolls. I mean, there was tons of literature about it. Don't get onto a drum kit until you first figure out, how to work on a pad and you get your hands working. So even then, I mean, I was probably 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, early on when I was a young boy, that like there was a system to step into, and drumming is wildly creative. And some of my favorite drummers are just, they break all the rules, but they break the rules because they know what the rules are. And they seemingly defy physics because they know them so well. It's not because they've ignored them. So there's something to me kind of inherently sort of kind of punk rock too about evidence-based marketing, strangely said, is that because you start to understand what gravity is in the marketplace, and what has a higher probability of working versus not working, and then you understand where the middle is, and then you try and push those things as far as you can go, knowing that there are limits, but at least so it's only cool to break the rules once you know them. If your whole vibe is I just like to break the rules and I can't explain to you what the rules are, you're just a poser, in my book. So in my honest opinion, hopefully I didn't offend anybody, but like that's kind of where I am at this point. So yeah, you got to know your roots in order to build on top of them, and it just didn't really exist kind of coming in for me into the industry. It wasn't until I got to the boot camp at my ad school that I started to learn some things, and to be honest, some of those things I've had to unlearn, and there's some good stuff in there, but there's still a lot of kind of witchcraft wrapped up in all of those things.
I think this is a very kind of like a huge debate that sometimes happens around strategy bubble, that especially for young talent, as you, Christopher, mentioned, that as a drummer, you need to understand, let's say, basic principles, some sort of core things, how to become a drummer or how to do your thing. But in our industry, in a lot of cases, it is almost kind of encouraged to kind of, as you said, to be this poser, to kind of come up just with cool, crazy ideas, if you are like a creative mind. But I will go back to myself. I don't think the strategists are creatives. Yes, we are now labeled as creative strategists, that we are almost encouraged to be half creative, half strategist. This is just my personal view. This is my personal opinion. But I do believe as a strategist, and especially as a young strategist who is starting out and who wants to really understand and learn the basics and fundamentals, you need to have some sort of also tools that you can kind of use to structurize your way of thinking. And I'm very much against those people who are like, all the frameworks are bad, all the frameworks are kind of limiting your thinking, and actually they are just slowing down you and they're not helping you. I am very much against these views, because I do believe that when you are starting out, you very much need some sort of like these tools or frameworks or models or whatever, you don't need all of them. You don't need to go on LinkedIn or on internet and collect all of those kind of like models that you can find, but you at least need to know, like, I don't know, core 2 or 3 and figure out which one works the best for your own taste. And I do believe that when you practice more and more strategy through the projects and through the time, of course, you start to get rid of those tools and you start to become more as a drummer on your own kind of like in your own kind of style when you get more experienced. But you can't be immediately experienced strategist or drummer just by picking up the sticks or just by reading the first brief. That's my 5 cents.
No, that's 100%. I mean, in the end, there are certain fundamentals that you can get seemingly creative with, right? And so there's patterns that can be recognized. So like a really good example. So if we'll get drummy nerdy, if for any drummers watching or listening will know that a paradiddle is essentially like a right, left, right, right, left, left between hands. Classically between hands. Essentially, you can play a 16th note sequence, 8 notes chord, whatever it is. It's just essentially telling you where to put your hands. But you can also start to substitute your hands for your feet. And now it's about limb independence across those same things. And so you can play a paradiddle pattern on one drum, and then you can start to distribute that pattern to different limbs across different things to hit. And all of a sudden, you've got these really interesting linear patterns that are built out of a core fundamental pattern that no longer sound like a paradiddle. They're being created using essentially the model of what a paradiddle is, but really it's a chance to become more independent and to be more expressive across a kit by understanding you can use your limbs in different ways, but you're all locked in to sort of like a common rhythm, and it gives you a feeling of freedom and escape, particularly if you know how much time you have to fill. All of a sudden, like, your muscle memory is kicking in, and you're expressing something interesting that the song needs in that moment, and your limbs are all in the right place at the right time. And the only way you were ever able to conceive of that was by first starting to know what is a paradiddle. And it's right, left, right, left, right, left, left. And when you first are introduced to it and you start to work through it, anyone hearing you practice that would be like, that is the most boring thing in the world. And then as you master it, and as you develop it, and as you start to take it across the kit, and you can actually put this on the piano, which we forget is a percussion instrument as well. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, where did all that come from? It sounds like music. And it came with a core understanding and respect for what the fundamentals are, and then a chance to build on top of them. So it's I'd not really thought of it this way. So it's interesting that I had lots of music analogies, but I didn't think the paradiddle was going to come into this conversation, and here it did. So maybe what's the hardest thing that you, Baiba, feel that you've had to unlearn in your own practice, a topic or a subject that you used to have as a go-to that over time you started to realize it's like, oh, maybe that was my misunderstanding?
It's a very good question, and I think it's a very good question, especially in context of brandLingual, because when we started to to the research, because behind the brandLingual there's a immersive research, there's immersive work, what we did this whole summer, and I would say for almost like a year or so. And I would say that before I started to dig into these topics around marketing, brand, and advertising or creative strategy, I was living in a completely different world. I would say I was also following all the intuitive way of thinking around these topics, and I was very much sure that I'm doing the right thing. Only after this, let's say, transformative year, by doing the research, by reading evidence-based theory books, by reading also academical peer-reviewed papers, by being constantly in conversations, not only in our internal duo with Christopher, but also with a bunch of experts that we brought into these conversations who are also practicing how to bring theory into practice. I would say, transformed my way of thinking about a lot of things. And even now, when I'm working with my own projects, or I'm working especially with my own coaching students, I can see that sometimes I can't pull out exact example even to kind of support my point of view, because I don't have something to show, because the thinking that I had a year ago is some sort of thinking that I wouldn't apply or wouldn't advise anyone to use in their work. And I think this is a hard truth, but I am transparent here. I'm just very honest with myself, and I'm very honest also in this conversation. And there's a lot of things and a lot of ways that how I was doing brand strategy and how I was doing the creative strategy, and now I just feel like it was very much not true. Yeah. Let's even start like about the topic about the brand positioning. Like, how do we do the positioning map? Like, how do we do 2x2 map? One of my coaching students he came with this slide that, oh, let's do 2x2. And I was like, no, 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 we won't do 2x2, because how 2x2 will work? It will be just, you will, out of thin air, you will put your competitor brands and your brand on some sort of 2 axis and then present it to your client like this is 100% truth, which is actual made up slide. My apologies.
No, in fact, you'll work and feel even more proud when you have perfectly rearranged that 2x2 so that, your brand is only the brand up in one box, and somehow you have avoided all of the competition by putting all the other brands down into other boxes that are at best really far away. And by doing that, you feel this great sense of accomplishment. And now everyone's going to feel very special and very unique. And somehow that's going to bring all the vibes internally necessary to then actually go meet the market for where it really is, and somehow succeed. I've gone through those same exercises, and I remember those euphoric feelings of, wow, we cracked it. Look at this. We are a category of one. No brand can touch us now. Teaching that at the Miami Ad School for many years, and now it's presented as this is something you're going to run into, and I just want you to know how useful it is or isn't. So in many ways, it's now like I have a chance to help other people recognize I guarantee you're going to run into this in a meeting, and here are its limitations. So I can't not teach it, because they would walk into a meeting and they would fall into its siren's call and be seduced into the magic, gameful playfulness of magically placing a brand out on its own wonderful growth island somehow. And no, that's not how it works.
Okay.
So I'll speak to the one that I continue to struggle with to this day, and I have my different hypotheses as to why. And this would be, the big one. This is brand love. Here's why I think it's a problem. I think it's a problem to struggle with, is that strangely our industry, or maybe not so strangely, maybe it's terribly predictable. Our industry attracts people who love a good story, and who perhaps find beauty in the emotion that can be conveyed in commercial things. A very young version of myself, I probably was in elementary school, starting to learn how to play tennis. And I was very smitten by, for some reason, all the cool tennis brands, and was in a tennis camp and on a tennis club, and had friends that played tennis, and they had this cool tennis racket, and they wore this sort of like 𝘂𝗹𝗶𝗶𝗿, this like little rooster brand, and 𝘂𝗹𝗲𝗏, and all these different, I forget some of the name of these brands, but I remember as a young, impressionable child, taking some Crayola markers and actually like drawing perfectly all the logos on a piece of paper, and I like hung it on my door of my bedroom, right? As if somehow my room was now sponsored by all these cool tennis brands. I could not afford any of these brands. We were just a middle-class family. And I remember my mom saying like, oh, are you going to be one of those? Right? Like immediately judging me for my superficiality of somehow like finding something attractive or seductive about these different colors and shapes and marks and logos. And I vividly remember this. And I also vividly remember her calling me out on like, it's the first time I remember my mom like judging me for like having some interest in these individual brands. And I also, the adult parent in me also recognizes that in that moment, she's also realizing, oh, wow, my son is into these things. And as a divorced single mom, I can't really afford to buy him any of these things. And yet now I know he likes these things, but I can't afford to buy these things. And so like, she's also wanting to kind of say, that's not cool, because now she feels pressure on her. But there was something about me that drew me into those marks that I had that tendency very, very early on. So again, this is nothing other than hypotheses, but somehow does our industry pull in a certain kind of person that for whatever reason finds some romance or lack of vulgarity or beauty in the commercial arts, and somehow this concept of being able to love and have deep relationships with brands is something that so many other people feel. And it is quite possible. I dare I say it is a thing that there are some people who feel this way about brands. It's just that there's never enough of them to consistently feel that way about brands across enough brands to ever have it make a difference in the marketplace. So our industry attracts people that might have their own personal fetishes around commercial art and design and creativity and storytelling. And it's part of what fuels our interest in the industry and the career. And often it's maybe even our superpower to succeed in the industry. But then the single greatest mistake we make is when we assume that everybody else on the outside that we even think there is an outside, also feels those same ways. And thus we just need to create work that always works for them in the way that it works for us. And the next thing you know, every creative brief that we're writing is us staring into a mirror of our ideal self, who has unique fascinations about things that disconnect with how the market works and how real buyers buy. And so I know I have these tendencies and they're implicit biases that I have, and I have to keep them in check. There are some brands that I feel like I have strong feelings for, but I can also go back and I can prove in my own closet, and I can prove in my, whether it's my clothes closet or my media closet, I'm actually looking at right now, my record collection, whatever it might be, the duplication of purchase law. I can see how I so love one record label, but my stack of records over here has 500 different record labels. Do I happen to have a bit more of one? Not really. I can go find a bunch of them, but I have more of everything else. And these are things that you have to admit. You have to be open to finding those patterns in your own behaviors to start to open yourself up to the real world. And I think that's one of the hardest things for strategists, any creative class workers, to continue to open ourselves up to the real world, the real market that we have to move, which is what makes marketing hard. It's easy for us to satisfy ourselves. It's harder to suffice the millions of people that operate at market level. So yeah, brand love is one I continue to struggle with. Helen Edwards, if you read her essay in Eat Your Greens, there's also a great APG YouTube video that I can also probably put in the links, to this episode, where she actually speaks on behalf of that particular essay, of where she talks about that there's perhaps some kind of emotional something. Let's not call it love, because the weakness of words is that we get into loyalty and these strong metaphors and things that perhaps we understand how humans interact, but then fall apart when it's between human and brand. But she makes this case, when all things are being equal, perhaps that brand that has just a little bit more emotional something is the one that garnered perhaps then through more emotion, more attention, more memory encoding, not so that in the end that you have some deep relationship with the brand, but there was enough stickiness there for you to pay attention to it more, that somehow when all things are equal, particularly in a parity category, it just increased the odds just enough that you perhaps choose that brand. And so there's some really open, interesting thinking for people stuck in the middle on these subjects who feel like they need their own support groups to kind of come in and out of them. But I'm definitely not in denial. It's one I continue to struggle with, but it's one that I have a much better handle on how to teach it, how to advise with it, how to practice with it. And yeah, that's probably one that maybe many people on this who watching or listening might also share in.
Why do you think marketers are picking up intuitive thinking versus evidence-based one?
Exactly. I feel like if you were to take our brandLingual course, if you were to continue to follow our content, you'll find that this is really our key core fulcrum of our thesis, that there essentially are two ways in which humans have to operate, one that is terribly natural and familiar to us, and one that is much more difficult for us to understand. And therein lies the gap between intuitive-based thinking and evidence-based thinking. Those things that perhaps someone with eminent power has eminence-based thinking, say someone like a Philip Kotler, right? Or I could go down a long list of different thought leaders, versus what the evidence says. So yeah, we naturally evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to intuitively interact and operate with other small groups of humans, and that's very natural to us. We've never been rewarded from an evolutionary fitness standpoint to have to know or feel how to move a million people. And that's what makes marketing hard, is how do you impact how a million people, quote unquote, behave, as opposed to a room full of people, your friends, your family, your agency team, your client team. These are quantities of people much more similar to the quantity of people you could put into a cave or under the shade of a tree that our ancestors got really good navigating socially. And so we can see who's different, and I know how to talk to Baiba versus another friend, and I know I can point you out in a room, and I can learn lots of things about you, and I can use that information as a way to just be a better partner or a friend or a colleague. And I know what might upset someone versus someone else, and I can have all of that knowledge when it's 3, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, maybe even more people. And I can see those patterns. But once you scale that to thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions, a lot of those social tendencies that I might have is how I might recognize how this person is different than that person and how to treat them this way versus that way. Those patterns, those as if by random, those individual associations, or dare I say insights, start to fall away at market level. And instead, you start to see these elegant law-like patterns start to present themselves, how humans start to then behave at scale as buyers. And then a lot of our initial assumptions about what we should be doing about segmenting and differentiating and hyper-personalizing, and the things that work for us in a room as humans don't necessarily play out, at scale. So anything intuitive feels natural to us, and it is not natural for us to understand how a million people think, and then how to try to impact over long periods of time the behavior of millions of individuals operating as if by random.
I think that thinking about how consumers are also operating from the behavior perspective is a little bit one-sided, because the whole concept is built on you need to have some sort of stimulus or some sort of input that you are like putting on the consumer or on the human being, and then these people will start to act or do something in a certain way to kind of fulfill our initiated goal. But actually, humans are not operating based on stimulus. They are operating based on their own decision-making process. And I think this whole concept also about analyzing consumers based on their behavior, not based on their decision-making processes, and also how they code and store the memories, are also a little bit misleading. So if we go back to your question before I started to ask before I asked my question about why do you think marketers are starting from the intuitive point of view, and you ask what are the biggest concepts that you think that has basically been over understood, or I haven't overlearned them through the time. I think one of them is also about how to actually understand human beings, how to actually understand consumers.
Yeah, if we just target narrower, results will somehow get better, right? If I just knew everything about my individual customer, somehow I will be a more effective marketer at scale. And these come from tendencies of like, if I just really knew my best friend better, if I really knew my boss better, will I be more successful? If I really knew my child's wants and needs, could I be a better parent? And at those one-to-one levels, it's quite possible that those are really good tendencies to kind of lean into. And in fact, there is impact to be made, certainly between parent and child. But when you're a marketer, it's all of a sudden now you've got millions of children, right? And you can't keep them all happy, right? And yet perhaps maybe even their happiness as related to your brand is not as important as simply being known and noticed. It's the patterns start to fall apart. But again, it's intuitive to how we would try to take care of an individual. And it's also terribly important how we take care of the people around us. It's when we try and take those same patterns and then with no modification, simply try to apply them at scale. And all of a sudden you start to realize that these people that you're trying to quote unquote focus on or care for rarely ever buy your category, rarely ever think about it, don't even want to. And you trying to make it for them some kind of life-death situation or some kind of like poetic, enlightened transformation to become a better version of themselves. And the category, much less the brand, much less the use case for the thing that you're selling, has little to no interest to that person because they have real lives to live. That's when things start to completely fall out of whack. And I would argue so much of the ineffectiveness of marketing, much less the small role that advertising plays in refreshing those memory structures, although a really important role over time, that it always kind of goes back to that. You're trying to take a playbook that has worked for you in your individual life, and you're trying to now play it out at market scale. And I understand why, because it's intuitive, it's inside out, right? And that's how we like to understand the world. But markets operate in ways that are unlike how we view individual behavior, and that's more of an outside-in look. And that's really a core thesis and a topic that we discuss quite a bit in brandLingual, and something that really sits at our own anchor, an own fundamental, that the way that we look about, particularly trying to navigate how a more intuitive 𝗂𝗹𝗶-based marketer enters into the practice versus someone who better understands marketing science and is trying to apply evidence-based principles. It's understanding that same dynamic that I think helps give you that shared fluency and opens up that sort of bilingualism that's really at the heart of the concept of brandlingualism, which is one of those things that Mark Ritson would refer to it as sort of bothism, right? So that's another way in which it's popularized. And but yeah, that really gets at the core of so much of where we're finding new inspiration and finding our sea legs and more solid ground by which to practice on.
Get to the core, it's also about control and kind of understanding that markets are actually not working under the control. Like you can't control the market. And I think in a Kotlerian way of thinking, CMOs and marketers, and also I would say CEOs who are still trained in or they are they are taking the masters in business administration. They are still trained in a Kotlerian way of thinking that you need to control. You need to kind of see the markets in a very deterministic way of thinking. But actually, markets are working in a very probabilistic way of thinking. And I think this probabilistic way of thinking is actually very hard for human beings in general, for us to kind of let the control go and kind of just increase these odds, as you, Christopher, always said to me in these one-to-one conversations, that you can only increase the odds so the outcome would be as good as you can get. But I think for a lot of marketers specifically, like if you are starting out in a new company, or you are like working as a CMO, and that you can be fired, or you can have some sort of hard talks with your management, then you want to be in a position where you are controlling those things that you are like putting out. And I think for a lot of marketers, it's a lot about, the question is actually about like how to kind of give away that kind of like a control and start to trust in this evidence-based ways how to do things. What are your thoughts, Christopher? This is just my kind of like observation.
No, I mean, this has been at the core of how we've been collaborating too, because it's often one of the more confronting things for people to hear, particularly on client side, when you suggest to them that they cannot change the behavior of the customer, when in fact it, in many of their minds, is their mandate to exactly do that. So somehow I've just attempted to rewrite their job description by simply just suggesting that, yeah, advertising is a weak force. It is not a strong force. It does not make it a inessential force being a weak force. It just sets different time horizons and lots of different expectations on how it actually works. The idea of simply increasing the odds of a brand being chosen is a wonderfully simple and beautifully elegant way, in my mind, to think about what it is that we're doing in the end, because in fact, it maps back now more towards how we live most of our lives. We're simply always trying to increase the odds of our own success. And if anything, it feels more intuitive, at least to me, to think of it that way. And so it start to back into the same similar tendencies that often make a Kotlerian point of view feel more natural and thus easier to sell. It is why the Kotlerian STP way of thinking has more mental and physical availability in the world, because it's easier to buy, to be very honest. But until you start to open yourself up to evidence-based thinking, there are also very elegant, simple, uncommon sense. But once you understand it, you start to understand why it actually is and should be more common, because it's really kind of moving everything, around you. But like that deterministic world, the probabilistic world, just us using these words can be turnoffs to people, because now everything sounds more academic or more scientific. But it literally is the difference between everybody wants to feel like they have control, everybody wants to look like they're in control. The more like you look like you're in control and sound like you're in control in a meeting, the more that you think you're going to level up in your career and make more money. But what if the best way to be in control is to simply recognize that you aren't entirely, but you can increase the odds of seemingly positive control by increasing the odds of your brand being remembered at the right buying occasions for the most people most of the time. And that isn't just something that advertising can do. It's something that all 4 Ps in marketing could actually help your brand accomplish more often than not. And that's a very noble thing. And because it's noble, it feels more controllable. And because you can map it out, and you can work through it, and you can discuss it, and you can plan against it, it feels more controllable. But in the end, we're simply increasing the odds that, in fact, that you're able to accomplish those things by first just getting a common shared understanding and fluency. So if any of that sounds interesting, that's exactly the kind of things that we actually train you and work you through in the marketing strategy course in brandLingual. So, but it's really blurring the lines between, what is deterministic and what is probabilistic. And as soon as you start to open yourself up to the best we can do is increase the odds, now finally you actually have some control of more predictable positive outcomes. It feels that way. And if that's how you have to feel in order to do your job, because now it feels more intuitive, then let's help you feel what that feels like. And so that you can not just dream about it and think about it and have it sitting on a book on a shelf, but you can actually go do something with it, that very same day. With whatever brands you're representing, whether you're agency side, client side, startup, C-level, whatever it might be, it should give you some ways to action, not just be a distraction.
Whoops, Christopher, you are already spilling too much of tea. You need to kind of start to shush yourself because people need to still kind of have some sort of a little surprise when they will join our platform, specifically when they will join our programs. And as Christopher mentioned earlier, we are launching 3 programs. One will be dedicated to the marketing strategy. Second program will be dedicated to brand strategy. And the third will be dedicated to the creative strategy, or let's say the difference between intuitive thinking in advertising and evidence-based thinking in advertising, and how to also bridge the gap between the two. And we have a fantastic website that we have created for you guys to check and also think about to enroll in our program. It's called brandlingual.co, not com. And co was our idea that it means community. So we choose this shorter version that we wanted to also incorporate this huge aspect of our learning platform or our learning school, where we will be placing a lot of attention on the community aspect, because this is the thing that we believe is somewhere missed or overlooked in a lot of educational platforms or academias or schools, where trainers and lecturers or let's say professionals are training others how to, I don't know, do better some sort of things in marketing, brand, and advertising. So this is something where we are putting a lot of attention to. And we are also huge believers that change, and also change in practice, can't happen by just finishing, let's say, 8-week program or 2 months program. You need to have, first of all, supportive group of peers who are also basically walking the same path, having different experience, but who can support you and also guide you. And you also need some sort of mentors around you that could help you to see a bigger picture, or who have walked, let's say, this line a little bit, who has walked this line, yeah, for a little bit longer period of time. And that's why we believe that community aspect is something that our platform will bring in, and also that you will find it incredibly useful for your ongoing learning journey. That this is not about, I don't know, 2 months experience by being together with us, with me, Baiba, and Christopher on the platform and your particular course, but this is more about your journey with all the community members together in a longer period of time. So this is kind of our key proposal to you guys.
I couldn't have said it better. And so, that's the episode. I mean, hopefully, if this made you, rethink a belief, or think about something that you need to learn or unlearn that you've been carrying around for your career, or even just a little, that's really a win. So yeah, so follow this show on whatever platform that you are listening to us now, so you can catch the next one. Share it with someone who perhaps enjoys a good marketing myth bust, because that helps us create more penetration and accomplish our reach goals, as we know, which is super important from a brand growth hygiene standpoint. And yeah, if you want to get involved in our online learning community, that is brandLingual. It is coming in 2026. And if you want first dibs on enrollment and updates, jump on the list that you can enter into at brandlingual.co. So until next time, keep building brands for the real world. Maybe, not just the slide deck version. And thanks for listening. All right.